Artifacts, all artifacts, are fascinating. Like bottles with messages washed up on the shore, surviving over the years. Artifacts carry their stories with them, stories from the past, for us, in our time, to think about and try to understand. As I chose these objects, these particular artifacts, and made drawings of them, I thought a lot about their stories and the people who had used them and what had been happening in their lives when they used them. As I learned the stories, I discovered that each one offered insight into the lives led and often tragically lost. By drawing them, I wanted to honor them and the people they represent. Even almost 75 years after the Holocaust, I wanted to try to know them, and in my own way, somehow, to bear witness. What is our obligation when we uncover such things? I approached drawing each artifact as if it were a portrait. I needed to know as much as I could about it. I needed to study and read about it. I needed to honor it. One of the first objects I chose was this shofar. It's a traditional ram's horn, like those blown across the centuries on the Jewish sacred holidays of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I wondered why this particular shofar was in a Holocaust museum.
In 1943, a rabbi imprisoned in a forced labor camp in Poland asked a young man named Moshe Weintretter to make a shofar. Moshe had never made one and had no idea how to do it. He didn't even know where to find a ram's horn. He also knew that if he were caught, his penalty would be immediate death. But his rabbi had asked him to do it, so he felt compelled to try. Moshe bribed a Polish guard who brought him the horn of an ox, not a ram's horn. He bribed the guard again, finally got a ram's horn, and somehow molded and carved it into a shofar. The rabbi blew this shofar in secret Rosh Hashanah services in the labor camp. Though Moshe was imprisoned in 2 more camps, including Buchenwald, he survived. His shofar had been lost. Somehow, though, it was found and eventually returned to him in Israel, where he moved after the Holocaust. In 1977, 34 years after he'd made it, Moshe Weintretter gave his shofar to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. That is the story of this shofar.
What's the story behind this prayer book, bartered by a man in a concentration camp in exchange for his daily piece of bread? Sometimes we know the journey of an object from the person who has given it to a museum. Sometimes, though, there are no clues to help us know its history. Who wore these shoes, now bronzed and standing by the river in Budapest, Hungary, a silent memorial to the Jews shot and killed there? What child wore this hand-knit wool sweater with buttons down the front? There are little dresses embroidered with flowers, stitched by mothers and grandmothers who watched their babies wear them year after year. If the infants survived, in hiding, on the run, in ghettos, in camps, these dresses became blouses for the growing girls.
This was the dress of a little girl named Chaya Verweer. Before the war, Chaya lived in The Hague, the Netherlands, with her mother and father and 2 older brothers. When the Nazis occupied the Netherlands, Chaya's family separated, each of them hiding in a different place. Her father became a resistance fighter and was later betrayed and then executed by the Nazis. Chaya was 2.5 when she was sent with other children, first to the Westerbork transit camp, then to Bergen-Belsen and Terezin. Later, she says she was lucky. She was put on the last children's transport out of Terezin and then taken in and cared for by the Vandenberg family in Leiden, the Netherlands. To protect and hide her, her name was changed to the non-Jewish name of Carla van den Berg, and she lived as Carla van den Berg until after the end of the war, when her mother found her name on a Red Cross list of missing children and was able to locate her. Chaya has said that she's always thought that if she had not been as little and as cute as she was, she wouldn't have been cared for by the women prisoners in the camps, and she never would have survived.
And now the story of Alexander Stupel, a well-known German Jewish violinist and a member of a respected musical family in Kovno, the largest city and capital of Lithuania. Alexander was a well-known violinist and concertmaster of the Kovno Symphony. His brother Boris also played the violin. When the Nazis occupied Kovno, they forced all its Jews to move into a very small area of a few blocks. In this ghetto, the Jews lived imprisoned, crowded together under appalling conditions. Alexander and Boris and the other Jewish musicians had their instruments among the very few prized possessions they were able to bring with them. On August 15, 1941, the Kovno ghetto was sealed with 29,000 people inside. 3 days later, on August 18th, the Germans held a special Intellektuals Aktion, a massacre in which 534 of the most educated men in the ghetto were murdered. The killings continued in the Kovno ghetto on a regular basis for about a year. During the summer of 1942, when the actions had stopped and the ghetto was in the midst of its so-called quiet period, the Jewish Council felt it was safe to request permission for the musicians to regroup into an orchestra. The orchestra consisted of 35 instrumentalists and 5 vocalists, a conductor, and the concertmaster, Alexander Stupel. Performances were held bi-weekly. In total, 80 concerts were given in the Kovno ghetto. For these Jews in this ghetto, holding on to even an echo of Jewish life and tradition was a statement of resistance. But that resistance could not last long. The Nazis liquidated the Kovno ghetto in July 1944, murdering most of the remaining residents and sending others to Dachau and Stutthof. Boris Stupel survived Dachau and made his way to Australia. His brother Alexander died in Dachau.
This is the Torah scroll that Louis Kleeman rescued from a synagogue in Bavaria and saved from destruction on Kristallnacht, November 9th and 10th, 1938. Known also as the Night of Pogroms, the word Kristallnacht refers to the shattered glass that filled German streets after widespread and violent anti-Jewish attacks on synagogues, homes, and Jewish-owned businesses all over Germany and Austria. Mr. Kleeman's son explained that his father crept into the synagogue just after nightfall, took one of the scrolls from the Ark — he couldn't carry more than one — and hid it in the house. He kept it hidden for 2 years, probably behind some clothes in the closet, until 1940 when he and his wife immigrated to the United States. This rescued Torah is now used regularly in the Lloyd Street Synagogue in Baltimore.
This is the wedding dress of Lily Lax. Like many Holocaust survivors, Lily began rebuilding her life in a displaced persons camp. She fell in love with and became engaged to another survivor, Ludwig Friedman, who bartered his food rations for a German parachute. A seamstress in the camp transformed the parachute into Lily's beautiful wedding gown, which was later also worn by her sister and by almost 20 other brides at the Bergen-Belsen and Celle displaced persons camps in Germany.
Parting from one's child was indescribably painful for those who sent their children away to keep them safe. Ida Kunstler gave this photograph of herself to Zofschi Sendler, the man who took her daughter Anita to care for her and keep her out of danger. Ida knew it was very likely that she would never see her daughter again. On the back of this photograph, in the hope that her daughter would always remember her and distinguish her from any other woman who would take care of her, she wrote, "Anita's real mother."
When the Jewish prisoners were dragged from the cattle cars onto platforms at the camps, The Nazis took all their possessions from them, including their sacred prayer shawls. After the war, this mountain of prayer shawls was found in a warehouse at Auschwitz.
Survivors of the camp at Terezin have recounted how Jewish prisoners performed Giuseppe Verdi's Requiem Mass in 1943. Terezin was called a show camp. The Nazis designed it to create the fiction that Jews were treated well there. When the Red Cross visited for the day, they saw children who had been carefully coached, playing and eating well. They saw adults who had been carefully warned, painting and rehearsing musical performances. What they did not see was the hunger, the fear, the despair that was the truth of Terezin. What they did not see were the regular deportations that took those children and adults to their deaths. In the midst of the cold, filth, and misery of Terezin, a young Romanian-born conductor, Raphael Schechter, gathered together 150 fellow prisoners. In a dark basement, with just one musical score and a broken piano, he taught them Verdi's Requiem. The prisoners memorized the words and the music. They gave 17 performances for their Nazi captors and the Red Cross visitors, and for themselves. For Schechter and his fellow prisoners, performing the Mass became an act of defiance, a powerful, strengthening inspiration for themselves against the enveloping terror.
I've heard it said that the story triumphs over oblivion. The drawing challenges disappearance. If we do not treasure the artifacts, if we do not wonder, if we do not study or think about them, we will find no answers at all, and no one will know the stories, and no one will even remember.